Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know how we're always talking about learning and knowledge? Well, today we're going meta. We're diving into how we even measure what, that domain-specific knowledge you've got tucked away in your brain.
Sounds tricky.
Oh, it can be. But luckily, we've got a fantastic study to guide us.
All right, lay it on me.
So we're looking at excerpts from an article in Educational Psychology Review, and it's called The Cronbach's Alpha of Domain-Specific Knowledge Tests Before and After Learning, a meta-analysis of published studies. Quite a mouthful, right?
Yeah, definitely a bit of a title, but meta-analysis, that means they looked at a bunch of other studies.
Exactly. They're analyzing the analyses, which helps us get the big picture. And the mission for our deep dive today. Well, first of all, we want to understand what actually makes a good knowledge test a reliable one.
Makes sense. If we're measuring something, we want to be sure our tools are up to snuff.
Absolutely. Then we're going to explore what the typical consistency of these tests actually is. Like, how much can we trust the scores we get? And prepare to be surprised, because the findings might not be what you expect.
Ooh, intrigue. I like it.
And then, because this is all about knowledge, we can't ignore the learning process itself. We'll be investigating how learning and development actually affect these knowledge measurements.
So a behind-the-scenes look at how we assess knowledge and what the numbers truly mean.
You got it. Now, to kick things off, we need to grasp this concept they use a lot. Cronbach's alpha. Sounds kind of intimidating, but it's really not that bad.
Let's hear it.
Think of it like this. You've got a test with a bunch of questions, right? Cronbach's alpha basically tells us how well those questions are all working together, how much they're measuring the same underlying knowledge.
Okay, so if all the questions are on the same topic and they're well-written, the alpha should be high.
You got it. It's like a measure of how internally consistent the test is. And that consistency is often used to judge a test's reliability. Like, are the results solid or just kind of random?
Right, so a high Cronbach's alpha usually means we can be more confident in the test results. But I'm sensing a but coming.
Oh, there's always a but in research. And this one's a big one. There's actually a debate raging about whether we should rely so heavily on this single number, this Cronbach's alpha, especially when we're talking about something as complex as knowledge.
Okay, so what's the heart of the debate? Why all the fuss about one little number?
Well, think about it. Knowledge isn't always this perfectly neat and tidy thing, right? Sometimes it's all beautifully integrated in your mind, all the pieces connected, but other times it's more fragmented.
Fragmented, like bits and pieces scattered around.
Exactly. Like, you might know a bunch of facts about a topic, but not really see the big picture, how those facts fit together.
Yeah.
And that's where Cronbach's alpha gets tricky. It kind of assumes that all knowledge in a domain should be super interconnected, and if it's not, well, then the test might not be seen as reliable.
So even if you have a good understanding of a topic, but your knowledge isn't perfectly woven together, the test might give you a lower score.
That's the worry, at least for some researchers. Like, imagine knowing a ton about different historical events, but not quite grasping the overarching causes or consequences. You have knowledge, but maybe not that perfect internal consistency the alpha craves.
It's like knowing all the ingredients for cake, but not the recipe.
Perfect analogy. You've got the knowledge, but not necessarily the connections. And this whole area of prior knowledge and learning, well, it's a huge deal in research. The researchers even mentioned a bibliometric analysis that found over 13,000 publications on the topic.
Whoa, 13,000, that's a lot of papers.
It is. And they also highlight another meta-analysis, this one focusing specifically on the relationship between prior knowledge and learning. And get this, they analyzed around 8,000 effect sizes.
8,000. Clearly, this isn't just some niche area of research. It's fundamental.
Absolutely. So before we dive deeper, let's define our terms. When they talk about domain-specific knowledge, what exactly do they mean?
Well, it's basically the stuff you know within a particular field. Think of it like the concepts, the principles, the procedures, all specific to that area.
Okay, so like knowing about gravity in physics.
Exactly, or understanding how photosynthesis works in biology. Or maybe knowing the steps to write a computer program in, well, computer science.
Got it. So it's not just general knowledge, but the specialized stuff you pick up within a specific domain. But the researchers point out that measuring this kind of knowledge, it can be surprisingly tricky. What makes it so difficult?
Well, for starters, knowledge itself is incredibly diverse. It's what they call heterogeneous. It's not this uniform blob of information. It varies in so many ways.
Like what Give me some examples.
Well, the domain itself matters. Knowing history is different from knowing chemistry, right?
Obviously.
But even within a domain, the content varies. Knowing historical dates is different from understanding complex historical causes and effects. And then we've got different types of knowledge. You might know that something is true. That's factual knowledge.
Right, like knowing the capital of France is Paris.
Exactly. But then you might also understand why something is true. That's conceptual knowledge, like understanding the political systems that led to Paris becoming the capital.
So deeper understanding. And what was the third type?
Procedural knowledge, knowing how to do something. So in this case, maybe knowing how to speak French.
Okay, so factual, conceptual, and procedural. Three very different ways of knowing something.
And it gets even more complex. The source of your knowledge matters too. Did you learn something in a classroom, from a book, through personal experience? And how's it represented in your mind? Is it a mental image, a concept, a set of steps? And the context you're in can also influence what knowledge you access.
Wow, so it's not just what you know, but how you know it, where it came from, how you think about it. It's a whole tangled web.
Exactly. And the way all these bits and pieces are connected in your mind, well, that's not fixed either. Some knowledge might be strongly linked, while other bits are more isolated. They talk about the interconnectedness of your knowledge network.
So, like a network of roads. Some are major highways, all connected, and some are little back roads leading off on their own.
A great analogy. And when those connections are missing, that's when you get fragmented knowledge. Think back to when you were first learning something new. You probably felt like you had a bunch of random facts, but couldn't quite see the big picture.
Oh, for sure. I remember learning about cells and biology with all these names and functions, but it took a while for it to click, for me to see how it all worked together.
Exactly. And the way you learn something, it can either help you build those connections or leave you with a bunch of fragmented pieces. Good instruction, it should help you integrate your knowledge, show you how the pieces fit together.
But if it's just a jumble of information, no clear connections.
Then you're more likely to end up with fragmented knowledge, even if you technically know all the individual facts. And here's another layer of complexity. You can even have misconceptions, wrong ideas, mixed in with accurate knowledge.
Oh, I know people like that. They'll cling to a myth even after you've explained the scientific evidence.
That's it. Those misconceptions can coexist with accurate knowledge, making the whole picture even more messy. And even when your knowledge is correct and complete, it can still be heterogeneous in its type and quality. Some knowledge is very symbolic, like a formula you memorize. Other knowledge is more intuitive, like understanding how to ride a bike. Some you can easily explain, other knowledge is more implicit, you just do it without thinking.
Okay, so we've got all these different dimensions to knowledge. It's complex, it's diverse, it's not always neat and tidy. And we talked about those three main types. Factual, conceptual, and procedural. Are those totally separate in our minds? Or do they kind of blend together?
That's a great question. Research suggests they're actually quite interconnected. You often need factual knowledge as a foundation for developing conceptual understanding, and being able to use that knowledge procedurally can reinforce both the facts and the concepts. Some studies even suggest that these types of knowledge can influence each other's development over time. But here's the thing. When researchers use fancy statistical techniques to try to pinpoint the underlying structure of knowledge, sometimes these types look distinct, separate. Other times they seem inseparable, all blended together. It seems to depend on the specific domain and the group being studied.
It's like they're dancing, sometimes close, sometimes apart.
Exactly. And that makes measuring knowledge even more challenging. And speaking of measuring, we also have to consider how the test itself is designed. Does it use multiple choice questions, or does it ask for open-ended responses? Could that influence what kind of knowledge we're tapping into and how consistent the results look?
That's a great point. I'd imagine the format could make a big difference.
Absolutely. Different question formats engage different cognitive processes. Multiple choice questions, they often rely more on recognizing the right answer. Open response questions, they force you to recall and organize your knowledge, to actually construct an answer. That can reveal a deeper level of understanding and the ability to connect ideas.
And I'd guess that difference in how your brain works, how it retrieves and uses knowledge, that could definitely influence how related the answers on a test appear, and therefore affect Cronbach's alpha.
Spot on. It all ties back to how we measure knowledge and whether a single number can truly capture its complexity.
Okay, so clearly measuring knowledge is a pretty complex undertaking.
Mm.
So let's finally turn to the study itself. What were the researchers hoping to discover with this meta-analysis?
Well, their primary goal was to give educational researchers a better understanding of what typical Cronbach's alpha values look like for all these published domain-specific knowledge tests out there. They wanted to provide a benchmark, a sense of what's normal.
Makes sense. We need a reference point.
Right. And beyond that, they were also interested in figuring out what factors might cause those alphas to vary, to be higher or lower. They looked at characteristics of the test itself, the specific subject being texted, and even characteristics of the people taking the test.
So a multifaceted exploration of Cronbach's alpha in the wild. And what do they find? What was the average Cronbach's alpha across all these studies?
Drumroll, please. The meta-analytic average Cronbach's alpha they calculated was 0.85.
0.85. That seems really high. Didn't they initially think it might be closer to, like, just above 0.70?
You remembered. That's exactly what they hypothesized. That 0.70 mark, it's often seen as the minimum acceptable reliability for a test. So finding an average of 0.85, it definitely raised some eyebrows. It suggests that the knowledge tests being published, they tend to be pretty internally consistent, at least on the surface.
But then they dug a little deeper, right?
Yeah.
They wanted to understand what that high alpha really meant in terms of how related the individual questions on those tests actually were.
Exactly. It's easy to get dazzled by a big, impressive number, but they calculated something called the estimated average item intercorrelation.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Basically, it tells you how strongly each question on a test is correlated with every other question on that same test. It's a measure of how much the questions are measuring the same thing. And based on that average alpha of 0.85, the estimated average item intercorrelation was only 0.22.
Wait, only 0.22. But the overall alpha was so high. How does that make sense?
It's a bit of a head scratcher, right? But it highlights a key point. A high alpha doesn't necessarily mean every single question is super strongly related to every other question. You can have a high overall consistency even if the individual relationships are more moderate. The sheer number of items can mathematically bump up that overall alpha even if the individual connections are weaker.
It's like a group project where the overall grade is good, but some members contributed more than others.
Perfect analogy. And to really drive home the point about variability, they calculated a 90% prediction interval for Cronbach's alpha, and it was huge, ranging from 0.35 to 0.96.
So even though the average was 0.85, in reality, alphas can be all over the map.
Absolutely. It's like saying the average height of a person is 5'8", but in reality, you've got people of all different heights walking around. Knowing the average is useful, but it doesn't tell the whole story.
Okay, so we can't assume all knowledge tests have the same level of internal consistency. What about test length? Did having more questions generally lead to higher alphas?
You bet. They expected to see a strong relationship between test length and Cronbach's alpha, and their analysis confirmed it. Longer tests tended to have higher alphas, which makes sense mathematically. More items, more chances to demonstrate consistency, even if those items aren't super tightly related.
So test length is a factor to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Now let's get to the juicy part. Publication bias. Did they find any evidence of bias in the alpha scores being reported in research?
This is where things get really interesting. They approached it from a few different angles. First, they looked at the distribution of those alpha values, but they used a statistical transformation to make the data more suitable for analysis. And what they found was a moderate skew towards higher values.
Skew. What does that mean in plain English?
It means the data was kind of leaning towards higher alphas, suggesting that studies with lower alphas, well, they might not be getting published as often.
So maybe studies where the test didn't seem as internally consistent, they were less likely to see the light of day.
It's a real possibility. It's like if only tall people were allowed to have their pictures taken, our perception of average height would be way off. And it wasn't just the skew. They also noticed these noticeable spikes in the frequency of reported alphas just above those common cutoffs, 0.70, 0.80, and 0.90.
So it's like researchers were aiming for those magic numbers.
It makes you wonder, right? Are researchers tweaking their tests, adding or removing questions until they just barely reach that acceptable level?
It wouldn't be the first time researchers have played a little fast and loose with the numbers. And speaking of numbers, what about that Spearman-Brown prophecy formula? What did that tell them?
That formula is a classic. It basically predicts how the reliability of a test should change if you add or remove items. And when they compared their findings to what the formula predicted, they found fewer short tests with low alphas than expected.
So again, it points to possible manipulation. Researchers may be lengthening those short, unreliable tests to get that alpha up.
That's the implication, but of course we can't know for sure what researchers were doing behind the scenes. Now, there's another common tool for detecting publication bias, something called a funnel plot. Did they use that?
They did. But they found that the funnel plot didn't give a clear signal of bias in this case. Why not?
They explain that it's likely because Cronbach's alpha, its size, isn't directly dependent on the sample size of a study. Funnel plots, they're really designed to spot biases related to sample size, so in this case, it wasn't the best tool for the job.
Okay, so while the funnel plot was inconclusive, other clues suggest a potential overrepresentation of those higher, more acceptable alpha scores in published research. Food for thought. Now let's circle back to question format. Did using multiple choice versus open response questions actually affect those reported consistency scores?
It did. Even after accounting for test length, they found that tests using open response formats tended to have higher Cronbach's alphas compared to those relying on multiple choice questions.
That's fascinating. Why do you think that might be?
Well, the researchers speculate that open response items, they might tap into a more interconnected understanding of the material. When you have to generate your own answer, you're forced to draw on more of your knowledge, to make connections, to synthesize information. And that process, it might reveal more consistent patterns of understanding than simply recognizing the correct answer from a list.
So multiple choice might just be scratching the surface, while open response forces you to dig deeper, revealing those deeper connections, those consistent patterns of thinking.
That's the idea. It highlights how the assessment itself can shape our understanding of what someone knows. Now let's shift gears and talk about how Cronbach's alpha changes as people learn and develop their knowledge.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. We're not just measuring static knowledge anymore. We're looking at how it evolves.
Exactly. And the findings here are pretty intriguing. In studies where people went through some kind of structured learning intervention, they saw a significant increase in Cronbach's alpha from the pre-test to the post-test.
So learning actually made their knowledge more internally consistent.
That's what the data suggests. It supports the idea that effective instruction can help integrate knowledge, making those connections stronger and clearer, leading to more consistent performance on the test.
It's like those puzzle pieces finally clicking into place.
Exactly. But here's the twist, the truly surprising finding. They also found a tendency for alpha to increase over time in longitudinal studies, even when there wasn't any specific teaching intervention happening.
Wait, so even without deliberate instruction, knowledge can become more consistent?
That's what they observed. It suggests that knowledge might become more homogeneous, more consistent, simply through the process of development, or perhaps due to ongoing exposure to information in our environment.
That's unexpected. You'd think without targeted learning, knowledge might stay the same, or even become more scattered as you pick up new bits and pieces.
That was the initial thought. But the researchers offer a couple of possible explanations. Maybe even without formal learning, people are still making connections, integrating knowledge through everyday experiences. Or perhaps repeated testing itself encourages people to organize their knowledge in a more consistent way.
So it's like our brains are constantly working in the background, trying to make sense of things, to build those connections, whether we're consciously learning or not.
That seems to be part of the story.
Yeah.
Now, what about age? Did they find any link between the age of learners and the consistency of their knowledge test scores?
This is an important one, especially as we think about lifelong learning.
Absolutely. And they did find a significant trend. Higher average age in the study samples was associated with lower Cronbach's alphas.
So as we get older, our knowledge becomes less consistent.
That's what the data suggests, at least within the age range they examine. And they offer a couple of interpretations. It could be that knowledge becomes more fragmented over time, especially after that initial learning phase. Or it could be that tests designed for older learners tend to cover more complex material, which might inherently be less interconnected.
So maybe it's not that our brains are getting worse at organizing knowledge, but rather that the knowledge itself is becoming more complex and nuanced as we experience more of the world.
It's a possibility, but it's important to note that their analysis primarily focused on younger learners up to early adulthood. We can't necessarily generalize those findings to older adults without further research.
Fair point. So much we still don't know. Now, what about those three types of knowledge? Factual, conceptual, procedural. Did any of those types show consistently higher alphas?
Interestingly enough, they didn't find strong evidence that conceptual knowledge always had higher alphas than factual or procedural knowledge. It seemed that any differences they observed could largely be explained by the length of the tests used to measure those different types. Once they controlled for test length, the type of knowledge itself didn't seem to be a major driver of internal consistency.
That's surprising. You'd think conceptual knowledge, with its emphasis on relationships and understanding, would naturally be more interconnected, leading to higher alphas.
It's a logical assumption, but again, it highlights the complexity of knowledge and how our attempts to measure it can sometimes yield unexpected results. Finally, they compared different subject areas like math, languages, science, and social science humanities. Did they see any patterns there?
Yeah, this is where those domain differences might really shine through.
And indeed they did. Tests in math and languages tended to have significantly higher Cronbach's alphas compared to those in science and the social sciences and humanities.
So the more structured subjects showed more consistent knowledge.
That's the trend. It aligns with the idea that math and languages, they often have more clearly defined rules and frameworks which might lead to more consistent patterns of understanding. While science and social sciences, they often deal with more complex, multifaceted phenomena where the connections might be less clear-cut.
It's like the difference between a neatly organized library and a sprawling, interconnected forest. Both hold knowledge, but in very different ways.
I like that analogy. And to wrap things up, the researchers even attempted to provide some preliminary guidelines for what Cronbach's alpha values might be expected based on different test characteristics, like test length, question format, whether learning was involved, the age of the learners, the type of knowledge being tested, and the subject area. But they were very clear, these are just starting points.
So not hard and fast rules, but more like guidelines.
Precisely. Because as we've seen throughout this whole deep dive, there's a huge amount of variability in Cronbach's alpha. So many factors can influence it, and we need to be cautious about overinterpreting any single number.
Okay, so let's bring it all home. What are the key takeaways from this research? What do we want our listeners to remember?
The biggest takeaway is this. Don't get too hung up on Cronbach's alpha as the be-all and end-all of knowledge assessment.
It's not the only measure of a good test.
Exactly. It's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Remember, knowledge is complex, it's messy, it's constantly evolving. Trying to capture all of that with a single number, well, it's a tall order.
So what does this mean for researchers and educators who rely on these tests?
This study really challenges the common practice of using those fixed cutoffs for Cronbach's alpha, like that 0.70 rule. They argue that given the heterogeneous nature of knowledge, those rigid rules might not always be appropriate. Instead, they suggest focusing more on the validity of the individual test items, on what each question is actually measuring, and on the overall score, not just the alpha. They also encourage reporting multiple measures of a test's characteristics, including that average item intercorrelation we talked about, not just Cronbach's alpha in isolation.
So a move towards a more nuanced, more holistic approach to knowledge assessment.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the numbers, understanding the complexities of knowledge, and using multiple tools to get a more complete picture of what someone truly knows.
And this research also raises some fascinating questions about how knowledge develops over time. We saw that instruction can lead to more integrated knowledge, but even without formal learning, our knowledge seems to become more consistent, at least for a while. But then there's that potential for fragmentation as we age, or as the knowledge itself becomes more complex.
It's a real paradox, and it begs the question, how can we design learning experiences that foster integration, that help us build those connections throughout our lives? Especially in a world where information is constantly bombarding us, where complexity is increasing. It's a challenge, but it's a crucial one to address if we want to support lifelong learning and understanding.
Absolutely. We need to be mindful of those potential pitfalls and find ways to support knowledge integration, to prevent our understanding from becoming fragmented as we navigate this increasingly complex world.
You said it. It's a fascinating area, ripe for exploration. And if any of this has piqued your interest, I encourage you to dive deeper into the concept of knowledge heterogeneity, explore the different methods we use to assess knowledge, and check out the ongoing debates in educational psychology about how to best measure what we know. It's a field full of surprises and unanswered questions.
Excellent advice. And that's a wrap for another deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the intricacies of knowledge and its measurement. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.